So on this episode of Full Stack Engineering, we've got Steve Foley with us. He's an engineering manager that Abelino and I used to work with, and he also runs a line leadership club. In that club, it's all about discussions of different leadership articles and things that help you become a better leader, with a focus on engineering leadership, but some of the principles just kind of apply across the board as well. So one of the cool articles that he brought up that really had an impact on me was an article about leadership modes, and those modes being frame, model, coach, enable. And we'll go into that in a little bit here. But first of all, Steve, thanks for joining us on the show today. Do you have anything else you want to add to that introduction that I might have glossed over?
No, you're doing fine. One of my interests is in engineering leadership. There's a lot of overlap into general leadership concepts around coaching people, making people better people, making projects work out a little bit better, all the glue in between the engineering. That's kind of where I'm interested in.
I'm glad you said something about yourself too, because making people better people is such a great way to put it. And I really think that really embodies what you do. And I definitely got that out of working with you. This article is by Sabrina Clark. It's up on LinkedIn as a LinkedIn article. We'll also put that down in the description below. I'd actually recommend going through and reading that full article. We're going to go through an overview of it, but we're not going to go over it verbatim. The original article, I think, does have a lot of value to add to this conversation, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite for the conversation we're about to have. That being said, Steve, could you give us a general overview of the article and the lessons from it?
Sure. So the article seeks to find that gap between the do or delegate kind of dilemma when it comes to work on your plate. Do you do the work yourself and maybe get things done quickly? Or do you delegate it to someone else and maybe give them a learning opportunity, but also have the risk that it doesn't quite get done the way you expect it to get done? Those aren't the only options you've got. This article kind of seeks to fill in the other options that might be there. It breaks them down into a couple different leadership modes, one being frame, where you're kind of giving some structure around an idea or a chunk of work you might need done. Modeling, kind of giving a, hey, here's what I do, now you can do it too. Coaching, working with someone to have them do the thing, but also support them doing that task or that work. And enabling, really just clearing the way for them to be able to accelerate and just go with the task. Those are kind of the modes it talks about, but I think the thing that Alex and Abelino and I found really helpful when we talked about it at first was the when of all of those things. So the article brings out an opportunity to think about when each of those modes might be most in play and gives a nice little axis between the amount of experience someone has and how well defined or how ambiguous a task or chunk of work is, and which one of those modes you might choose for any given situation. It's particularly helpful for, at a glance, kind of figuring out where you are very easily, where your work is, and where the people and resources doing that work are, and being able to choose a leadership mode and being more likely to be successful in that sort of situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you touched on so many points right there that I definitely want to dive into. First, maybe we can touch on do it myself or delegate, because as I kind of like think back and remember my times as a more junior leader, of thinking that do versus delegate was a black and white thing of should I do it myself, should I delegate, and not really realizing that there's a really broad spectrum in the middle of there. And not only is there a broad spectrum, but there's what do the people need from you that you're delegating to? Because can you just delegate and go completely hands off and walk away and then come back to what was happening and everything is going to go right, which is definitely something the article touches on? Or are you going to need to delegate, but in a way where you're a little more hands-on, not necessarily to the point of like micromanaging, but you need to provide more guidance, more direction, and stuff like that. So what are either your thoughts around that, or what are some of your experiences around that, Steve?
I tend to take some cues from Agile software, and I take things individually in little chunks, and I look at what resources I've got for a job, and I understand that it's not just here's the work, it's got to get done. It's hey, we got to do this as a team, and we all have abilities that are all over the map. Like I don't have the same skills that somebody else does, and how do we use those skills together to be able to get the work done? And sometimes that leadership mode I'm looking for is a lot more on the pairing sort of base. Like, let me show you, let's work together like we do stream programming or pairing. Let's take this skill, we'll pair on an idea, and it's not necessarily an engineering idea. It might be, hey, this task, or as a kind of a step back, let's pair on this work, more than just code and keyboards, but let's frame it out together. Let's put some structure together. Even if it's not pseudocode, it might be how we're going to approach a problem. And then hand it off a little bit. And maybe someone else works on it, and then they kind of ping pong back and forth, much like I would do in an editor. We might just do it around a concept instead of actual engineering work or code work. So I kind of like to take a lot of different approaches for those sorts of things, and it works well with our mindsets. And when we can kind of tap into the things we do normally as engineers, apply them to people and apply them to situations, and maybe that meta layer of work, I think we start to get into these different leadership modes pretty well.
And to explain the model a little bit in a graphical way, because they do provide a graphic that goes along with it. You've got the 4 steps: framing, modeling, coaching, and enabling. But they're not a linear sequence. This is how I kind of like thought of leadership, or like progressing up in a skill set, before I saw this model. And so I thought of it as, for lesser experienced folks or a lesser experienced team, that you need to spend more time framing and modeling on the experience side. As people got more experienced, you shift over to coaching and enabling them to do the work. And so one of my big revelations when seeing this article that really, really helped is that there's actually a second axis to that problem. On the chart of this model, the y-axis across the bottom is skill level of the team. So that is definitely one of the variables at play. And going from left to right, you can have an experienced team, a capable team, or an expert team. And this can apply to individuals as well as a team. So different individuals could be in different spots of this graph as well. That's one axis that you can move on. But there is a whole nother axis to this problem, or to this domain. And that's the level of ambiguity of the environment that you're in. And that was a big aha moment for me. So you've got at the bottom uncharted territory, and then working your way up to things you might be uncertain about. And then at the top, you've got a really clear idea of the problem, what needs to happen, solutions, stuff like that. And that really spreads this graph out to where you're no longer on this linear axis of, okay, I just moved from framing to modeling to coaching to enabling. And then at the end, check complete. I have this successful team and they're totally performing and everything's good. It's not only a 2D matrix like that, but also, like you mentioned in the overview, Steve, you're not at one static point for the entire lifespan of the project. As different situations change in the project, you can actually be moving around and need to move around on that chart.
I think there's also an aspect of individual needs. I was working on a situation today where it was very clear to me what needed to be done, and the person I was working with and looking to hand some work to wasn't quite so clear to them. Their experience in the area didn't make it obvious, and so what might be clear to me might not be clear to them, and we need to make sure we find a mode that's going to work for their space. And as they get more skills and more experience, and they do some research or maybe do some spikes on that particular area, they're going to get those skills and things are going to become more clear to them. So they're going to be moving around these boxes, and maybe a different approach later in the same chunk of work might be even more helpful.
Yeah, totally. And I guess to kind of go along with that too, I think the experience axis also doesn't just mean title, for example. So like inexperienced doesn't mean junior engineer, expert doesn't mean senior engineer. There's like level of experience on the certain problem that you've been working with. For consulting like we've done, it could be the industry that your client is in, that you're partnering with. There could be a lot of different things that impact that experience level. Or new technology is a good one. Like, is this a tech stack you've worked with before? Or are you introducing a new piece of technology into the system you've never worked with before? And that can move somebody who's a senior engineer to inexperienced at this one particular technology or way to implement it, or, whatever. So even just things like that can move people around on the scale as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think part of what played into my aha moment around this as well was I thought of these stages in context of like, treat others the way you would want to be treated. I was at a certain point where I want to be coached and enabled, give me the direction of what to do, give me the resources on how to do it. I see the path forward. Let me just go out and do that thing. I thought that because of that, it was kind of like disrespectful or looking down on other folks on the team of not putting them in that same position or not treating them with that type of like attitude and giving them that environment and stuff like that. But I think it's Simon Sinek says, don't treat others how you want to be treated, treat others how they want to be treated, which I think is a good revelation to apply to this as well, because that concept got me thinking, wait a second, I'm not working with 100% expert people on a crystal clear problem. My project is not on the enable step of this graph. Where are we on the chart? I was like, wait a second, we're in really uncharted waters for what the company and a good chunk of people on the team have actually done before experience-wise. Even though we have a handful of senior people in title on the project, we had some mids and there's other folks too, but a project that had a majority of senior folks, we were all across the spectrum of the experience axis, but we were definitely in uncharted waters on the ambiguity axis. So it's like, wait a second, coaching and enabling is the wrong thing to be doing right here. We need to drop back down. I need to drop back down to framing and modeling and really helping to explain the problem, make sure it's well understood, put up the constraints and take the time to explain what's going on, why we're doing what we're doing, and also drop back to modeling that. So it's a lot more one-on-one time with folks, kind of like what you were talking about with pairing, but also getting together group huddles to be able to do more alignment together, do system solutioning, and even just the product conversations too. Why the heck are we building what we're building in the first place? Why is this important? What does this product actually do that's different from other products on the market? Like what makes it special, and all that kind of stuff, and really work on that overview of the problem and really set that up for folks, because we were in the uncharted territory and that was not clear to, a handful of folks.
Sure. And I also look at this graph as an opportunity for making change from where you need to be or where you want to be down the road. So if we're in a place where maybe my staffing is going to change or my resourcing for a project is going to change, and I know that I'm going to need to be in a place where I can delegate more work via coaching and enabling, how am I going to get there? Do I need to make sure we're getting more and more skills? Do I need to be bringing more skilled people in a particular area onto the team? Like, how am I going to change the dynamic of the work and the resources such that I can start leveraging these other leadership modes as the project changes, as the timeline changes, or something goes crazy, we need to fix something. There's an opportunity to move around and be able to dictate how you move around a little bit. So it very much is a dynamic thing that works for you and you can work for.
That's a good point too, of influencing how you move around on the chart too, because it's not just all about being at the whims of the environment or the situation around you. Especially as a leader, you want to try to have some kind of control over steering the ship you're on. So like, do you have any of those like techniques or tips that you would recommend, or what's some of your like secret sauce for being able to navigate through framing, modeling, coaching, and enabling?
I like to think in advance. I'm an agile guy, so I tend to work on the things that are in front of me and just in front of me. But I also like to have an eye for the future. So a lot of that's going to be, hey, where is this project going? I know that I've got this kind of work. I know that maybe these features are lined up, but where are we going in the bigger picture? Where do we need to go with staffing? What is our budget looking like? Like, what do I need to be worried about coming down the road? And it's not that I just see that, it's that I'm asking about that, and that's part of the conversation. I'm listening to people. So whole time kind of keeping an eye towards the future a little bit. I think the other thing to keep in mind is just paying attention to what's changing. And the things that I find changing are people's skills. So I kicked off a little bit of work today knowing that someone is very strong and their abilities are great on researching and understanding, and they have absolutely no experience in this one area. Great. Use your research to go learn that thing, and then you're going to be further in that thing next time I come around or when the next phase of this thing comes. And so trying to set up those situations where you can learn to learn and use people's ability to learn to get to the point where they have those skills and start figuring out where you're going to be in a different box and being ready for it. So I did some framing today. Pretty sure in a couple of days, I'm going to be in a place where we're going to be modeling something because that person has figured something out in the next couple of days. And so this one little thread is going to be moving through some of these boxes, I think, fairly quickly.
That leads into something really good too that just popped into my head as well. This model works across the board for a lot of different things, not just writing code, not just individual contributor work. So this also applies to leading other leaders or training other leaders. So you can move a leader through framing, modeling, coaching, and enabling of the leadership pathway as well.
I'll even back it up and go the other direction. And I think about some of the projects I've worked on that have been very unclear in new technologies. Understanding the group I'm working in might be having to frame and work together to frame a project or a problem we're facing. And so not just leadership modes, but working modes for a team that's trying to figure something out. You wind up being leaders for each other when you're peers a lot of times, and making sure that you're engaging with each other in models that work for your modes that work for you as a team can also be pretty helpful. So if someone wants to go ahead and run off and enable, well, you might be there, the rest of us aren't. If we're going to do this together, maybe we need to start bringing it back into, can you coach us a little bit to bring you with you? Can you model? Can we frame things and work together as a team to get there if we don't have all of that clear leadership sort of situation, or we don't have that structure?
That is such a good point too, of your level of ambiguity works on that individual level as well as the team level. So there's a big difference. Like, this ties back into knowledge sharing. There's a big difference between one person going off, kind of ascending the mountain of enlightenment on a particular technology or something like that, and then being the guru who knows it all. And, oh, so-and-so is like the whatever, the Elasticsearch person, or I'm trying to think of another tech, but whatever. They're like the person on this particular tech, and everybody else is scared to touch it. And that one person is the guru, and it's just like, go to them. But you haven't brought the team up this ambiguity axis by doing that. And so what you just described is the team doing knowledge sharing together in a way that elevates everyone through the uncharted to uncertain to clear territory on the ambiguity axis. And that can be the other axis to this problem. That can be incredibly powerful for where you land on this chart.
Sure. Super helpful. Knowledge sharing and making sure you're crossing the line together. Like, that's the game. If you're a team, you got to get there. And if there's only one person that knows something, share that knowledge, and then you have more collective experience. You have some more flexibility and all that stuff. And you may need that person who's really ascended the mountain a little bit in some technology to be able to frame something or model something for you. Maybe they do the leadership for the group in that aspect, and you trade off those duties to get everyone kind of leveled up or to clarify the situation.
That's a good point, because that's kind of that place where, say, like, you as a technical leader of a project might be in the spot of coaching and enabling the guru, if you will, to be able to get that knowledge. But then the guru's in the spot of modeling that knowledge for the rest of the team so that they can move up kind of that level, that axis as well. So it's not necessarily like your entire team is in one particular spot and everybody's in that spot. This kind of adds this third dimension where it's like, it depends on the context. Are you talking about a specific person? Who's that person? Are you talking about the team in general? Are you talking about potentially your company, especially if you're running multiple projects? There can be a lot more depth to this than the simplicity it kind of has at face value.
Totally. Yep. There's a lot more to it.
Avelino, you've been quiet. Do you have any thoughts on this?
So I've definitely used elements from this framework in the past, and after reading Frame, Model, Coach, and Enable, everything just clicked. And something that greatly impacted me was not looking at this framework from a technical skills standpoint, but more from behavioral, and using this to help an individual from the past on a project essentially learn how to work effectively and efficiently in a team. And I think it was challenging for me because I'm always trying to tackle something from a technical perspective, but coming down and using Frame and Model just really facilitated that. And after a few pairing sessions and conversations, the individual was just soaring.
Yeah, this totally applies to all the meta stuff we do too. Like, I think about some of the things when we're starting a new team and the uncertainty of even working together, the uncertainty of what practices we're going to be using, where are we putting our code, what do we know about our client, what's this project trying to do, the mission of everything, whatever it happens to be. This comes into play for all of that stuff too, whether you know it or not. You're probably doing some of these things, and it kind of becomes just a feel for how things work.
Well, this has been great. Steve, are there any other last thoughts or words of wisdom or nuggets of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
Sure. I have a copy of this chart sitting on the wall right here on my desk, and there are plenty of times I just look up at it and have that moment of inspiration. I'd say keep it handy. It is a great rule of thumb, a great guide. It is not the only way to look at things. Certainly when I'm looking for a quick bit of inspiration, mid-conversation even, it's nice to have some of these thoughts available and at least have a small toolbox to start drawing from to get started. Do read the article. We have not done justice to all the great examples and text in the article. So read it and read it from time to time. In the leadership group I work with, we have a list of all the articles we've read, and I actually go through my notes from time to time. And it is uncanny how many times we go back to things that we've read. This one in particular, we've touched on a number of times as kind of a foundational concept that we can apply in so many ways. So don't be shy about getting your hands dirty reading this stuff and spending a few extra minutes on it.
That is great advice. That being said, thank you very much, Steve, for coming on the show. You've definitely been one of my great mentors. I always appreciate your advice. Glad you could share it with other folks today. And for everyone else, we'll catch you next time on the next episode of Full Stack Engineering.